The night was unusually cold for Edinburgh, the kind of chill that creeps into your bones and settles there. On the outskirts of the city, a quiet road stretched through dense pine forests, almost forgotten by the world. It was here, under the dim glow of streetlights, that Clara Duval's life came to a sudden, tragic end. The official story was simple: a car accident. Clara, 32, a devoted nurse, had been driving home from a late shift at the hospital when her vehicle veered off the road and plunged into a ravine. Flames consumed the car almost instantly, leaving nothing behind but twisted metal and the acrid smell of burning rubber. The world mourned her death, calling it a devastating accident. But there was one man who didn't just mourn, he performed grief like an art form. That man was Adrian Holloway, her husband. Handsome, polite, and impossibly charming, Adrian moved through the aftermath of tragedy with careful precision. At the funeral, he stood beside Clara's brother, Peter, tears streaking down his face. Peter, heartbroken and blinded by grief, held Adrian's hand. He thought they were mourning together, sharing the loss of a beloved sister. What Peter didn't know, and would not discover for many years, was that the man he was holding the hand of was the orchestrator of Clara's death. Adrian's charm was a mask, a carefully constructed facade designed to manipulate everyone around him. Friends, family, even strangers in the street, all saw a devoted husband devastated by a cruel twist of fate. But those closest to him would later realize that his grief had been rehearsed, perfected to elicit sympathy and avoid suspicion. Even the police initially believed it was an accident. The car showed no signs of high-speed impact, no skid marks, and no mechanical failure. It was almost as if Clara's car had simply stopped. And then, as if guided by some invisible hand, the flames began. It was a scene so meticulously staged that even seasoned investigators were momentarily fooled. Yet, for those who looked closer, there were subtle inconsistencies. Clara had been healthy, energetic, and cautious. How could she simply lose control on a quiet, empty road? And why had Adrian survived a crash that had destroyed her vehicle entirely, with barely a scratch to his own body? Peter remembered the funeral vividly. The sunlight caught the glint of Adrian's wedding ring as he clasped Peter's hand. Peter squeezed tightly, wanting to draw comfort, to share the pain. He remembered Adrian's face, somber, tear-streaked, utterly human. And in that moment, he had no idea that he was holding the hand of a killer. As the mourners filed past, laying flowers on Clara's coffin, no one suspected that this was only the first act in a carefully orchestrated series of crimes. Adrian Holloway had a pattern, a dark blueprint for control and destruction, and Clara had been the first piece in a much larger, sinister puzzle. The city would remember the accident, the funeral, the grieving husband, but the truth, the hidden story behind those flames, would remain buried for years. And one question lingered in the minds of those who later learned the truth: what drives a man like Adrian to commit such a calculated, cold-blooded act? It was a question that would haunt Edinburgh, and the world beyond, as Adrian's dark story began to unfold. To understand the mind behind such a crime, we must look back to Adrian Holloway's past, into the shadows of a childhood that would shape a killer, and reveal the first cracks in his charming facade. Before we go further, I would love you all watching this video to drop your DNA on that subscribe button because it motivates us that we are turning into a family not just as a subscriber. Like and share this video so others would get to learn the lessons in this video. Lastly, comment on where you are watching from. Adrian Holloway was born in 1960, in a quiet suburb of London. To anyone looking from the outside, he was the son of a respected family. His father, a decorated police inspector, and his mother, a compassionate nurse. A life full of privilege, opportunity, and guidance. But beneath the surface, there were early signs that Adrian was not like other children. He craved attention in ways that were unnatural, even unsettling. Friends and neighbors would later recall him pretending to collapse at the smallest provocation, lying about illnesses that didn't exist, and exaggerating injuries for sympathy. If someone scraped their knee, Adrian had fainted dramatically, drawing the spotlight onto himself. By the age of 10, Adrian's behavior had escalated. Small fires started appearing in empty sheds near his home, earning him a reputation among neighborhood kids as the pyromaniac. When caught, he would charm adults with tears, convincing them it had been an accident, or blaming someone else entirely. Every lie, every manipulation, was meticulously calculated. Even at school, Adrian showed signs of strategic thinking far beyond his years. He avoided homework, convinced classmates to do it for him, and charmed teachers into giving him special favors. He had a favorite saying that would later define his approach to life. Why do it yourself when someone else can do it for you? It wasn't mere laziness. It was a philosophy rooted in control and manipulation, a desire to bend the world to his will while maintaining a perfect facade. By his teenage years, Adrian's antics became darker. He lied about illnesses, cancer, seizures, even mysterious fevers, to manipulate his parents and peers. He studied the reactions of those around him like a scientist, learning how much he could get away with, and what would provoke fear or pity. This was not the behavior of a harmless trickster. Psychologists later would look back and see the early markers of a calculating personality, someone capable of manipulating, deceiving, and ultimately harming others to achieve his goals. But at the time, everyone saw only the charming boy with a smile, the one who could make you laugh, cry, or feel guilty, all in the span of a single conversation. As Adrian grew, this pattern never faded, it intensified. Every relationship, every job, every connection became a stage for him to test control. The seeds of his future crimes were planted in those formative years, hidden behind charisma and intelligence. The world would later see Adrian Holloway as the loving husband, the charming gentleman, the grieving widower. But those who knew the full story, the quiet investigators, the survivors, and even the victims, would recognize the signs that had been there from the very beginning. By the time he met Clara Duval in Edinburgh, Adrian had honed his skills to a deadly art. What started as small manipulations and childhood tricks had evolved into a sophisticated understanding of control, deception, and persuasion. And he was ready to apply them in the most intimate, terrifying way imaginable. The sterile white halls of Edinburgh General Hospital were bustling with nurses, doctors, and patients. Among them moved Clara Duval, 32, dedicated to caring for others, known for her gentle heart and unwavering professionalism. She never imagined that amidst the routine of hospital life, a man would step into her world who would change it forever. Adrian Holloway first appeared in her life as if by design, charming, confident, and impossibly polite. He had recently transferred to the same ward, his presence polite yet magnetic. He smiled easily, listened intently, and remembered the smallest details about everyone he met. It was the kind of charm that made people trust him immediately, unaware that it was carefully practiced, honed to perfection. Clara's friends and colleagues noticed how attentive he was, how he offered small favors, remembered birthdays, and carried himself with effortless charisma. To them, Adrian seemed perfect. To Clara, he was captivating. She felt a spark she had never known, drawn in by his intelligence, his humor, and the warmth that seemed to radiate from him. But subtle red flags began to appear, moments so small that most people would ignore them. He would ask overly personal questions, insisting on knowing her daily schedule. He seemed unusually interested in her health, gently probing if she was tired or stressed. To Clara, it was sweet concern. To her mother, Betty Duval, it was unsettling. Betty noticed the way Adrian's gaze lingered, the way he guided conversations, the subtle way he encouraged Clara to rely on him. "There's something not right about him," she whispered to a friend. But Clara, swept up in admiration and affection, dismissed her mother's warnings. What neither Clara nor her colleagues could see was that Adrian's charm was a tool, a weapon in a slow, calculated campaign of control. Every smile, every compliment, every whispered word of reassurance was part of a carefully orchestrated plan. He was patient, meticulous, and above all, strategic. Within months, Clara's life began to change subtly. Small ailments began to appear: fatigue, headaches, moments of confusion. She brushed them off, assuming the stress of work and marriage. But Adrian was already setting the stage for something far more sinister, a gradual weakening, both physically and emotionally, making her dependent on him for support. The seeds of manipulation were planted early. Adrian encouraged Clara to share her thoughts, confide her worries, and rely on him for guidance. And she did, blindly trusting the man who seemed devoted to her. Every gesture of care was a step closer to absolute control. At this point, the danger was invisible to everyone except a few cautious observers. Friends noticed her subtle changes, her mother's instincts screamed warning, but Clara was too in love to see the trap tightening around her. And the question began to linger in the back of the audience's mind: how far would a man go to maintain control over someone he claimed to love? The first months of Clara and Adrian's marriage seemed perfect to the outside world. Friends envied her new life, colleagues admired their devotion, and the city of Edinburgh saw them as a picture-perfect couple. But behind closed doors, something was changing, something subtle, almost imperceptible, yet deeply unsettling. Clara began to feel tired for no reason, a fatigue that sleep could not shake. Simple tasks became exhausting. She found herself forgetting appointments, misplacing items, and relying increasingly on Adrian for guidance, reassurance, and care. At first, she blamed stress. Her work as a nurse was demanding, and the adjustment to married life could be overwhelming. But the truth was far darker. Adrian was carefully orchestrating her decline. Every sip of tea, every suggestion to rest, every act of kindness was part of a calculated plan to make her physically and mentally dependent on him. Friends noticed the changes. "Clara, you don't seem like yourself," one whispered during a hospital break. But Clara smiled weakly and waved off concern, trusting the man who had promised her love and protection. Even her mother, Betty, grew increasingly uneasy. She watched her daughter grow smaller, more fragile, and more reliant on Adrian. Her instincts screamed that something sinister was happening, but Clara couldn't see it yet. Adrian, always the charming husband in public, carefully managed the appearances of their life. At parties, he laughed easily, held Clara's hand, and charmed everyone around them. No one could guess that inside their home, he was the source of her mysterious ailments, subtly controlling every aspect of her life. Even Clara began questioning herself. "Am I just overworked?" She wondered aloud one evening, staring into the mirror. Her reflection looked tired, pale, and drawn, but Adrian reassured her with a gentle touch and a soothing voice. Each word, each act, pushed her deeper into dependency. By the time the audience fully realizes it, the tension has built, something sinister is happening behind closed doors, and Clara is trapped in a web carefully woven by the man she loves. And then came the night that would change everything. The night Adrian had been planning since the very first day he met her. The culmination of charm, control, and deceit was about to unfold. The evening of May 27th was quiet, almost unnervingly so. A soft mist clung to the streets of Edinburgh, blurring the streetlights and muffling distant sounds. For most, it was just another calm spring night. But for Clara Duval, it would become a night she would never wake from. Adrian Holloway had spent weeks preparing for this moment. Every detail was meticulously planned. He had chosen a remote stretch of road, lined with dense trees, far from the prying eyes of neighbors or passers-by. He had tested the vehicle, the path, even the timing. And Clara, trusting and unsuspecting, would never see it coming. The sedatives had been administered subtly, hidden in the evening tea he made for her. Clara, already exhausted and dependent on him, drank it willingly, thinking nothing of it. Her eyelids grew heavy, her thoughts blurred, and the warmth of Adrian's hand on hers as they left the house felt comforting, yet it was guiding her toward danger. As the car rolled onto the deserted road, the tension in the air was almost tangible. The audience knows what Clara does not, her life is in Adrian's hands. Every twist of the steering wheel, every flicker of the headlights, every sound of the tires on the asphalt was part of the deadly choreography he had rehearsed countless times. Minutes stretched like hours. Clara's head lolled against the seat, her consciousness slipping further as the sedative took hold. Outside, the road curved sharply. Adrian maneuvered with precision, parking the car near a solitary tree where the flames would soon engulf it. The engine was turned off. The doors locked. And then, the fire was set. The flames began to lick the edges of the vehicle. Smoke filled the cabin. Clara's body, too weak to react, remained unconscious. The audience watches, heart pounding, knowing that she is moments away from death. An off-duty officer happened upon the scene, slowing at the sight of the smoke. Adrian, calm and composed, assured him that no one else was in the car. Twice he repeated it, with carefully measured emotion. His grief seemed genuine, convincing even the most skeptical observer. But the camera, or the narrator, lingers on the subtle details. Clara's unconscious form, the eerie silence of the remote road, the deliberate calm of Adrian. The tension builds, leaving viewers on edge. Would she survive? Was it truly an accident, or the first act of a calculating murderer? And then, just as the flames began to intensify, the screen fades, the sound of crackling fire echoing in the silence. The chapter ends with a chilling thought: Clara's fate is sealed, but the truth behind her death is far from known. Clara Duval's death was officially labeled a tragic accident, a random misfortune on a quiet Edinburgh road. The city mourned, the funeral was held, and Adrian Holloway, the grieving husband, performed his role flawlessly. But not everyone was convinced. Leslie Roberts, Clara's closest friend and confidant, had always been protective of her. Even in grief, something about Adrian felt off. When she visited Clara and Adrian's home to collect a few personal belongings for the hospital, her eyes caught a small pile of unusual medications on the kitchen table. Pills that Clara had never been prescribed. Medications with names that didn't match her medical history. A chill ran down Leslie's spine. Something wasn't right. She remembered the subtle fatigue, the forgetfulness, and the growing dependency Clara had displayed over the last few months. And now, these pills, unexplained and out of place, suggested a darker truth. Leslie tried to voice her concerns to the local authorities, but they dismissed her observations. "It's just grief," one officer said. "You're seeing patterns that aren't there." Her unease was brushed aside, her instincts ignored. The first warning signs were quietly silenced. Despite this, Leslie couldn't shake the feeling that Adrian was hiding something. She replayed moments in her mind. The way he had insisted on managing Clara's care, the charm he wielded so effortlessly, and the unsettling calm after her death. Each memory deepened the knot of suspicion in her stomach. The injustice of it all, Clara dead, Adrian seemingly untouchable, and the authorities dismissing real concerns, added an emotional tension that gripped anyone witnessing the story. Viewers, like Leslie, begin to sense that there is a dark pattern forming, that Clara's death might have been no accident at all. As Leslie pondered these questions, the audience begins to see the emerging pattern in Adrian's behavior: control, manipulation, charm, and now, perhaps, murder. The story teases the idea that this may not have been a one-time crime, but the first act in a much larger, calculated plan. A lingering thought hangs in the air: if Adrian could orchestrate Clara's death with such precision, how far would he go next? Who would be the next victim of his charm and cruelty? Years after Clara's tragic death, Adrian Holloway's charm remained his most dangerous weapon. By now, he had perfected the art of seduction and deception, moving from city to city, always searching for his next mark. His path led him far from Edinburgh, across oceans, to the bustling harbour city of Auckland, New Zealand. It was there that he met Felicity Crane, a vibrant, independent oncology nurse. She was intelligent, confident, and fiercely kind. A woman who dedicated her life to saving others. To anyone else, she was untouchable. To Adrian, she was the perfect target. Their meeting seemed like chance. Adrian appeared polite, attentive, and engaging, a man who genuinely seemed to care. Felicity was drawn to his charisma, his intelligence, and the way he made her laugh. He was charming in a way that seemed effortless, weaving attention, compliments, and thoughtful gestures into every interaction. But beneath the surface, every smile, every touch, every whispered word was carefully calculated. Slowly, Felicity began to experience subtle changes. Small headaches, unusual fatigue, blurred vision, symptoms she initially dismissed as stress or overwork. But viewers, now aware of Adrian's past, recognized these as the first signs of manipulation and danger. The tension grows, as the audience watches Felicity unknowingly edge closer to peril, unaware that Adrian's charm is the mask hiding a dark, predatory mind. Even in public, Adrian's control was invisible. To friends and colleagues, he was the perfect partner, attentive, considerate, always present. But behind closed doors, the dynamics shifted. Felicity began to rely more on him, her confidence slowly undermined by subtle suggestions, her independence weakened by invisible forces she couldn't name. Viewers feel the fear and anxiety build, empathizing with Felicity and sensing that history is repeating itself. Adrian's pattern is clear: charm, dependence, subtle harm, and control. Clara's fate had foreshadowed what might happen next, and the audience is left holding their breath, wondering how far Adrian will go this time. The stage is set for the honeymoon, supposedly a celebration of love, but in reality, a prelude to horror. Every romantic gesture is a thread in a carefully woven trap. The sun had barely risen over Cook's Beach, New Zealand, casting a golden hue across the water, when Felicity Crane thought her honeymoon could not get more perfect. The air was warm, the waves gentle, and Adrian Holloway, the charming husband she trusted completely, seemed attentive and loving. But beneath the idyllic surface, danger was already closing in. It began subtly, a strange taste in her food, a heaviness in her limbs, blurred vision that she assumed was fatigue. Felicity drifted into a deep, unnatural sleep, one that would last more than a day. When she finally awoke, she was not where she expected. Her eyes opened to the dense greenery of a remote forest, the morning mist clinging to every leaf. The car she had driven herself, normally safe and familiar, now felt like a cage. Gasoline fumes seeped from the trunk, a choking warning that something was very wrong. Panic surged through her veins. She struggled to breathe, to think, to act, but every attempt to regain control only emphasized her vulnerability. Adrian was there, or at least, his absence was deliberate, calculated. The audience knows the truth: he had orchestrated this situation, rehearsing every detail to ensure maximum control. The romantic honeymoon, the carefully built trust, the seemingly innocent gestures, all were threads of a deadly tapestry. As Felicity's mind raced, trying to understand how she ended up in such a terrifying situation, viewers experience her fear intimately. The forest is silent except for the occasional rustle of leaves, the distant call of birds, and the faint hiss of gasoline threatening to ignite. Every second counts. The tension escalates as she realizes the trap had been set long before she even left Edinburgh, a pattern repeating itself, a dark echo of Clara Duval's fate. The audience feels trapped alongside her, heart racing, caught between hope and terror. And then comes the moment of maximum suspense. Felicity sees a phone, a chance to call for help, but will she manage to escape Adrian's meticulously planned scheme? Will she survive the night, or become the next victim of a man who kills with charm, patience, and cruelty? Felicity Crane's terrifying ordeal shook her to the core, but she was alive. And that survival would set in motion a chain of events that Adrian Holloway could not control. The first spark of hope came from Jane Crane, Felicity's determined sister, a woman who refused to let her siblings' near death be dismissed. Jane had always been sharp and unyielding, but now her resolve hardened into something relentless. She confronted the authorities in New Zealand, insisting they look closely at Adrian Holloway. "You don't understand," she said, her voice steady despite the fury in her eyes. "He's dangerous. He's not who he says he is." At first, her concerns were met with bureaucracy and doubt. But Jane was persistent. She traced Adrian's past, uncovering the tragic death of Clara Duval in Edinburgh, Scotland, and the disturbing similarities between the two cases. Small details began to align, the patterns of charm, manipulation, and danger, and investigators across 3 countries started to take notice. An international investigation was launched, linking authorities in Scotland, New Zealand, and the UK. It became clear that Adrian was not an isolated threat. He had operated across continents, hiding behind his charm, exploiting trust, and manipulating those around him. Every phone call, bank transaction, and travel record was scrutinized. Every whisper, every instinct, every survivor's testimony was gathered. The investigators began to see a hidden pattern emerge, a blueprint of control, deceit, and attempted murder that spanned years. Adrian's charm, which had once masked his cruelty, was now a trail of evidence. It was subtle, intricate, and almost invisible to the untrained eye, but for the authorities, the pieces of the puzzle began to fit together. As the investigation into Adrian Holloway intensified, a retired detective from Edinburgh's Metropolitan Division, Ian Rourke, stepped forward with a chilling revelation. He had been following Adrian's trail for years, quietly piecing together evidence that others had overlooked. What he revealed would shake the investigation to its core. Ian exposed that Adrian's charm and manipulation were not confined to his wives. Decades earlier, while working in hospitals across Scotland and the UK, Adrian had experimented on vulnerable patients, particularly children and elderly individuals under his care. His methods were subtle, hidden doses of sedatives, minor overdoses, and careful observation of how his patients responded. No one had suspected, and no charges had been brought. This revelation expanded the stakes dramatically. Adrian Holloway was no longer just a husband who had committed murder, he was a predator whose crimes were decades-long and meticulously premeditated. Every charm, every lie, every act of care was a step in a calculated plan, a blueprint that stretched across continents and years. The audience feels the tension ratchet up. The man they had seen as merely deceptive, cruel, and controlling was far more dangerous than anyone could have imagined. His crimes were methodical, and the realization hits like a thunderclap, he had been perfecting his deadly skills for decades. Yet, even with this damning information, Adrian remained untouchable. His ability to charm, manipulate, and deceive had kept him beyond the reach of justice for years. He had moved, planned, and manipulated with precision, leaving few tangible traces for investigators to act upon. As investigators dug deeper into Adrian Holloway's past, a shocking picture began to emerge. His crimes were not limited to manipulation and murder, they were layered, calculated, and insidious. Across continents, from Scotland to New Zealand, Adrian had left a trail of destruction that went far beyond what anyone had imagined. Evidence revealed a pattern of arson, often targeting homes he had lived in or planned to exploit financially. Fires broke out in properties in Auckland, Edinburgh, and even rural estates in England, each suspicious, each conveniently timed to benefit Adrian's financial schemes. Insurance policies he had taken out on his victims' lives and properties were cashing in, funding his lavish lifestyle and enabling his next manipulations. Fraud became his weapon of choice. Bank accounts emptied overnight, joint finances drained, and forged documents manipulated authorities and victims alike. Friends and family were left bewildered, powerless to stop him. Adrian's charm masked a cold, calculating mind, one that could spin stories, feign innocence, and deflect suspicion with frightening ease. Law enforcement struggled. International borders, missing evidence, and Adrian's ability to charm and evade scrutiny created near-impossible challenges. Even as detectives connected the dots, he remained one step ahead, moving, plotting, and smiling in the faces of those who sought justice. And yet, a question lingers, a haunting one: who will be his next target? Adrian Holloway's path of deception now led him to Sydney, Australia, a city of sunlit harbors and bustling streets. Here, he met Simone Banerjee, a 41-year-old NHS manager with wealth, independence, and a life built on careful planning. She was strong, confident, and self-assured, everything Adrian found irresistible and, more importantly, exploitable. At first, Adrian presented himself as the perfect partner. Attentive, charming, and charismatic, he gradually inserted himself into Simone's life, weaving a web of trust. The audience sees the contrast clearly, Simone's independence against Adrian's subtle control. Every compliment, every promise, every gesture was a step toward manipulation, designed to create reliance while masking danger. Yet, the tension is immediate and palpable. Investigators, now aware of his history, sees the foreshadowing of his deadly plans. The yacht they would soon sail on, ostensibly a romantic adventure, harbored hidden dangers. Life jackets tampered with, navigation carefully manipulated, and provisions of gasoline subtly positioned all hinted at disaster. The suspense is suffocating. Simone is blissfully unaware of the threat lurking in her midst, while the audience's anxiety escalates with each scene. Adrian's financial manipulations continued in the background. He persuaded Simone to alter her will, granting him access to her fortune. Every act was calculated to strip her independence while keeping her trust intact. Just as investigators were closing in on Adrian Holloway, a shocking betrayal shook the entire operation. A trusted forensic consultant, someone assigned to support Operation Shadow, had been quietly feeding Adrian information about every move the authorities were making. Every lead, every scheduled interview, every piece of evidence, Adrian now knew before the investigators did. The betrayal sent shockwaves through the team. Detective Ian Rourke and his colleagues in Scotland, New Zealand, and the UK suddenly realized that years of painstaking work had been compromised. Files had to be rechecked, witnesses re-interviewed, and strategies rebuilt from scratch. What had been a tight net around Adrian now felt fragile, stretched thin, and dangerously exposed. Adrian, the charming predator, had just gained a dangerous advantage. Every narrow escape he had ever orchestrated seemed within reach again. Could he slip through their fingers once more? Or would the investigators adapt quickly enough to finally trap him? Despite the betrayal, one truth becomes undeniable: Adrian Holloway had overestimated his control. The web of lies he had spun across continents could not shield him forever. Every clue, every survivor's testimony, and every piece of forensic evidence still held the power to bring him down. With the betrayal exposed, the investigators faced their greatest challenge yet. But the final reckoning was approaching, and Adrian Holloway could no longer outrun justice. After years of deception, manipulation, and near misses, Operation Shadow finally succeeded. Adrian Holloway's carefully constructed empire of lies and crimes had been exposed, and he was arrested in Glasgow, Scotland, under international warrants. Handcuffed, flanked by detectives from 3 countries, Adrian's charming facade began to crumble under the weight of undeniable truth. The trial that followed was nothing short of a global spectacle. Witnesses from New Zealand, Australia, and the UK traveled thousands of miles to testify. Felicity Crane recounted the harrowing experiences that nearly cost her life, her voice steady but filled with emotion. Leslie Roberts detailed the early suspicions, emphasizing how Adrian had manipulated everyone around him. Forensic breakthroughs, including hair and tissue analyses from decades-old evidence, finally linked Adrian to Clara Duvall's death and multiple attempted murders. Every lie Adrian had told was systematically dismantled, every act of manipulation exposed. The emotional payoff is immense: survivors and families finally see justice for their loved ones. Adrian, once untouchable, was now convicted of murder, attempted murder, fraud, arson, and a litany of other crimes. The judge's words were clear: this was a dangerous man who had preyed on the innocent for decades, and the sentence would reflect that reality. Even as the gavel fell and justice was served, a lingering unease remained. Could there still be unknown victims? How many lives had Adrian Holloway touched, manipulated, or harmed that would never come to light? The question hung over the courtroom, over the families, and over viewers, a reminder that even the most meticulously calculated evil can leave traces unseen. Adrian Holloway was sentenced to life imprisonment, a culmination of decades of manipulation, murder, and deceit. The courtroom was silent as the gavel fell, marking the end of his reign of terror, or so it seemed. Families breathed relief, survivors exhaled, and the world finally saw justice served. But the shadow of his crimes lingered. The emotional scars he left behind were deep. Clara Duvall's family mourned the life that had been stolen, and Felicity Crane struggled to reconcile her survival with the trauma Adrian had inflicted. Simone Banerjee, once ensnared in his web, reflected on how nearly every aspect of her life had been infiltrated and manipulated. The psychological impact was enduring, a haunting reminder that even when a predator is caught, the effects ripple through the lives of victims and communities. Adrian's charisma, charm, and cunning remained almost mythic. Stories of his manipulation circulated in whispers across hospitals, neighborhoods, and cities in the UK, Australia, and New Zealand. Rumors of other unknown victims surfaced. Did he truly stop, or were their lives affected that the world would never fully know? The uncertainty left communities wary, fascinated, and unsettled, reinforcing that evil often wears a friendly face. If you found this story gripping, subscribe for more chilling tales of mystery and deception. Comment below who you think Adrian would have targeted next, and hit the bell to never miss the next story in our series.